Now I'm going to start customizing my mesh to better suit my image reference. So this means things like splitting the torso and the legs apart to better define the difference between the body and the pants. This means splitting the feet off so that I have an obvious pant leg and obvious shoes tied into the pant leg. And at this point, I'll also add in the hands to the body. Okay, so step one, I'm going to remove the legs from the body, separate them out. And in this case, I'm going to use the Edit Mesh Cut Faces tool, and I'll just cut a nice straight line across the waist in the side view, matching my side view reference. And I'll be left with some extra verts left over that kind of don't match the new cut that I made, but that should be all right because it's in the waist area. So I'll use Mesh Extract to pull the two body parts apart. And now I've got a separate torso and separate legs. And I'm going to use the Edit Mesh Transform Component tool on the bottom of the torso to just move those verts in and tuck them inside the pants a little bit. And I'm really kind of exaggerating it there, but we can always fix that later in the modeling process or in the sculpt process. So now I'm going to add breasts to the character. Since she's wearing a shirt, I don't need to add full detail to the breasts. I can just get away with creating the extra volume. And to do that, I'm just adding a few extra cuts. So we'll see that I started with a cut from the arm down to the center of the chest, and then I cut across from the center of the chest all the way into the middle, so that I've added a new row in the center. We can kind of see how it turns at a right angle there. And then I could just pull those verts straight out to create the volume of the shape there. And I'm going to play around with the topology a little bit in that area, just to kind of create a nicer flow. But since most of the detail in this character is going to be represented with sculpting, I could probably get away with not even doing this level of detail and just waiting until I'm in my sculpting package to add the extra detail for the breasts. The hands start as just a simple cube, and I'll add some subdivisions to the shape of the cube. And we'll do that to correspond to the fingers on the hands, so we'll have the 4 subdivisions across. And I can extrude those faces out. When I extrude these, I want to make sure that I turn on the option to extrude the faces separately in the Edit Mesh window. And I'll just extrude the fingers straight out as just cubic shapes. And now, before I add any more detail, I'll reshape the fingers to better suit my reference. With the hand, we do want to remember that the fingers are different lengths and they connect to the hand at different points. A very common problem that I see with models is connecting the knuckles in a straight line across the hand and having fingers that are all the same length. Obviously, when we hold up our hand and we look at it, we can see that neither one of those is the case. And that's why I spend time moving the base of the fingers around and reshaping the length and the overall shape of the fingers. Next, I connect components around the edges of the fingers to create the middle knuckle. Because I'm planning on defining this character more with sculpting, I'm not going to spend time to create proper topology for deformation in the hands. I'm just going to focus on the overall silhouette and shape and worry about retopologizing later. Now moving on to the thumb. With the thumb, we don't want to extrude straight to the side or straight down off of the finger, off of the hand. The thumb emerges from the palm of the hand at kind of a 45-degree angle. So I've changed the faces on the side of the hand so that I'm able to extrude to match that kind of angle. And then I will add subdivisions and extra faces in that area until I have something that I can extrude out. And at that point, once I have the extrusion, treating the thumb is basically identical to the way that I handled the fingers on the rest of the mesh. Once I'm happy with the shape and the volume of the hands, then I can move on to connecting it to the wrist. And the wrist connection is really pretty easy. We have the cylinder of our wrist, and we just need to create a corresponding socket on the hand. So I'll start, I'll make my reference visible again, and you'll see that I'm adjusting it to match the reference. But I'll start by cutting off some faces from both the hand and the arm. And I'll be left with a certain number of verts, and I just want to try and match the number of verts between the two. So the arm is nicely topologized, it's got a nice layout. I just want to try and match the hand to that. So I'll end up with the same number of verts on the opening at the hand, and I'll just merge those verts together. And where necessary, I can add subdivisions. So you'll see that I've inserted an edge there, inserted a vert to that edge, and that'll give me a matchup between the hand and the wrist. And I do want to add some subdivisions between the hand and the forearm. I want to have at least one extra subdivision right around the wrist, almost as if it's a bracelet or a wristwatch. That's going to facilitate deformation later on in the process. And I'll add another row right between the wrist and that forearm row. So I'll have 3 rows lined up at the base of the arm. And I'll spread those out so that I get an even taper. And I want to view them both smooth and not smooth to try and get the proper shape in there. So now we just did the hand. Let's start and do the foot. Start by cutting off the bottom of the leg. The process with the foot is simpler than the hand. The foot starts as a cube, and I just reshape it to create a basic foot form. With the foot, we want to remember that it's very narrow near the ankle and that it widens out at the toes. It's wider on the instep than it is on the outside of the foot. And the foot slopes down fairly sharply from the ankle to the toe. It's a lot less flat than we tend to think of a foot being, because we tend to think of feet in shoes, not bare feet. So I'm going to add some cuts along the center of the foot, and I'm going to add some subdivisions and just move some points around to capture the inset. I'll also add a subdivision around the side so that I can create some roundness around the edges of the foot. And you'll see that I just pull those in and scale them down. And that will create a roundness for the foot that gives it more of a natural shape. I'm adding a beveled set of edges here, and this split is going to be the split between the big toe and the rest of the foot. I'm not going to represent all the individual smaller toes. I'm just going to do one big toe group, and then the rest of the toes is another group. So I'll delete out the faces from that beveled area, and then I'll just fill in the hole or extrude extra faces and merge those together. And I'll end up with a shape that looks reasonably like the big toe and the small toe put together. Now the sandal itself is a little bit easier to create. I've started by duplicating the foot just so that I can start with an overall shape and I don't have to start from scratch for the shoe. And I've deleted away everything but the bottom, and I flattened it out. And I'm left with kind of, something kind of looks like an insole, which is a good basis for the start of a shoe. And I'll clean that up, and I'm just reducing the polygons so that I have something that's easier to work with. And I'll extrude that straight down, and that will create the depth for the sole in this area. Next, I want to add the heel that she has on the shoe. So I'm going to move both the faces of the foot and the shoe up, and I'll just extrude the faces from the sole straight down to create the shoe shape that I need. Because I'm viewing this mesh smoothed, it's going to be impossible to get very sharp edges. So what I'm going to use is the Edit Mesh Crease tool. And I can use the crease tool on edges to create hard edges even when I'm in smoothed mode. So that's what those bold shaded edges are. Those are creased edges. And we can see that once I've placed those in there, it creates a more hard-edged look for those areas of the smoothed mesh. Last is the band over the foot that connects the foot to the shoe. I'm just going to duplicate some faces from the shoe itself and push those up. And I'll subdivide this to create an arc shape. So I'll have a two-dimensional arc shape. In this case, I just beveled one of the edges that I already had. I could have used the Split Polygon tool or the Connect Components tool or the Insert Edges tool. All I really need is an arc-like shape, and I'll push and pull my verts out and around until they are as close to the foot as I can get them without disappearing inside the foot. And in some cases, I won't be able to get enough detail to wrap it around the foot. In that circumstance, I have to subdivide again using Split Polygon or Connect Components or whatever to add a few more verts so that I can have the curvature that I need to wrap around the foot without disappearing inside it. At this point, I'm just going to polish the shapes that I have. I'm going to fit that strap on the sandal more closely around the foot. And I'll make sure that where I can, I'll use the verts that I have to position it more closely to the shape of the foot. And in some cases, I'll have to use my Connect Components tool or my Split Polygon tool to add more verts. So around the edge of the foot, for example, so that I can curve it around the foot without interpenetrating into it. Same thing on the opposite side. And now it's just a matter of polishing the shape of the foot and integrating the foot into the base of the leg, which is very similar to the process of integrating the hand into the arm. And with that, the body is basically done. And we can turn our attention to the head, which has an entirely different set of challenges.